The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000.
Aside from the resurrection, I believe this story of the feeding of the 5,000 is the only one that's recorded in all 4 Gospels. And that should tell us something. If the writers are recording this story, and all of them do so, I think that telegraphs to us that this is really important. It's pivotal in some way. And so the big question becomes, why? Why this story instead of so many of the others? And I think there are some really profound reasons for that. But first of all, what do you think? Why did we have this one recorded so often and so faithfully? What is it about the story that sets it apart? What do you think? Okay, she just preached my sermon. We can go home now. It is so true, though. There's so much symbolism in this story, isn't there? Jesus is the bread of life. Jesus is the good shepherd. And what does a shepherd do? A shepherd feeds his sheep. There's not just a glimpse into the great divinity of Jesus in the story. I think there's also a very, very powerful sense of who he is as a human being. And that's one of the reasons why I think this story is included so much. Yes. Another good point. I think what we're seeing here is that this is a model for us. It's not just about an event that happens in the wilderness. This is not just about who Jesus is. This is about who we are. And we can really glimpse, I think, how we respond to similar situations where people are in need by looking at what those disciples do and what we do. And trust me on this one, we want to be more like Jesus than the disciples, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Let's just leave that for now and go back to some context. Because when this story begins to unfold, some really momentous things have happened. First of all, John the Baptist has been murdered by Herod. We saw that last week. This was the first cousin of Jesus. These men were tight. They were close. They had not only a spiritual bond, but they had a physical bond as well. Jesus is grieving. And we know that when he sends his disciples out for the first time to go and preach in the gospel's shadow, so to speak, because Jesus is there, but he's not doing everything. He sends them out to preach to the towns in Galilee. What is Jesus doing while they're out doing that? He's off in the hills by himself. And that's because he's grieving. Have you ever stopped to wonder who cares for the caregiver? Some of you in this room today have either been in a situation where you have been so responsible for the well-being of someone you love, or maybe you're in that situation right now, or maybe you're going to be in that situation at some point in the future. There is a huge weight that comes upon us when we are responsible for the well-being of somebody else. It's wearying. It's wearing. And if we're going to look after other people, one of the things we have to do is look after ourselves. And we hear this all the time when people talk in casual conversations, but we really need to take this to heart. If you're going to look after somebody else, you have to make sure that you look after you, because you will not have the energy, the time, or the resources to do what you need to do unless you do also take care of yourself. Jesus is needing to be by himself. He's needing to confront the reality of his situation, and I think he knows that what has happened to John is going to happen to him. So this is intensely personal on so many levels. So he goes off by himself. He's recharging those batteries. He's restoring his strength, not just physically and emotionally, but spiritually as well. Then he's ready to go back into the fray. So I'm encouraging you to be careful, to do what you need to do to look after yourself. Because Christians, it seems to me, are often so vulnerable to thinking that I need this for me, but I can't have that for me because I'm so invested in this situation, or my responsibility is to them. And your responsibility is to them. But you need to look after yourself. When Jesus has these men come back, what does he do? He knows they've been out, they're tired, they're worn down, they're emotionally drained. And so he takes them off by themselves. Again, just a wonderful snapshot of how he understands the need for rest and rejuvenation. And we ignore that warning to our peril. When they come back and they have a chance to rest, it doesn't last very long because the people recognize them. And all of a sudden they're in the wilderness, but these people have followed them out. And it gets late. You notice that Jesus has been preaching and teaching because that's what Jesus does. Now it's time for a break. Now, the idea of the disciples is we're going to get rid of the need by getting rid of the needy. Their solution is, all right, you're on your own. And instead, Jesus turns the tables and he says to them, okay, this is the reality we face. You feed him. Now, if you go to John chapter 6, there's a little interesting glimpse here, because before all of that unfolds, Jesus is talking to Philip, and he says to Philip, wow, what are we going to do with all these people? Where are we going to feed them? How are we going to feed them? Philip basically says, don't look at me. I don't know. He's the one who says it would take so much money just to feed these people. And then Jesus steps in and says, okay, what are we going to do about this? Why do you think Jesus says to the disciples, you feed them? What's going on with that? This is very important, I think. Why not just do the miracle and be done? He's preparing them. He's readying them for their responsibilities. And I think he's trying to communicate that we don't get to fob off what's happening around us. The first thing that really strikes me about this story is Jesus does not just care about your spiritual needs. Of course, he cares about your spiritual needs, but he also cares about your physical and material well-being, your emotional wholeness, and all of it together. He takes a holy and a holistic approach, and we must do the same thing. And I've said this again, so let me reiterate that sometimes Christians treat people like projects. We assess the situation, and if we have a sense that maybe somebody's going to be receptive to the spiritual message, then we're all over it. But the minute those people decide, no, I'm not in for any of that. I don't want the Bible stuff. I don't want the spirituality. Just, I have a need, and that's what's consuming me right now. Sometimes I've seen this happen where Christians just decide, well, if they're really not interested in that, I got other things to do. And we abandon them. Jesus has compassion. That's the one thing that comes to the forefront here. He has compassion on these people, and he acts to take care of their need. And that would have happened regardless of whether or not they were spiritually inclined anyway. As a matter of fact, later in the story, he's going to say to these same people, look, I know you're not following me because you care about what I'm teaching. Many of you are following me because I fed you and you want me to feed you again. Sometimes we use that kind of situation to excuse what we're not doing. Jesus today says to us, all right, if they're hungry, you feed them. If they're unclothed, you clothe them. If they need somebody to talk to, let it be you. Whatever the need is, we cannot and must not just dismiss it or hope it's going to go away. Now look, if it had been me and I saw all those people in the wilderness, I would have justified it like this. Look at those stupid people. Why did they come all the way out here into the wilderness where they know there's no food, and now look at them? Man, you're on your own. See ya. Because it's just easier to do that than to have to step up and step in and do something about a situation that may be daunting and intimidating even for us. So Jesus confronts the reality. He says to them, we need to feed these people. What are you going to do? Peter's the one who says, look, even if we got little, how far is that going to go? But it's Andrew, the quiet one, that comes to Jesus and he says, well, look, I got a kid here and he's got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I don't think for a minute that Andrew has any clue what can be done, because he kind of expresses some doubt and says, well, it's not much. And yet there seems to be something in this man that twigs to the reality that Jesus is who he says he is. So Andrew offers something, and he's the only one in this situation that does that. So point number 1, Jesus cares about all of our needs. Point number 2, if you cannot be a Peter, then you be an Andrew. You be an introducer. You be a bridge to Jesus. Because every time we see Andrew, that's what he's doing. We know very little about Andrew and what happens after when Jesus is gone. We know all about Peter. Peter gets the ink. He gets all the press. But Andrew is the one that introduced his brother Peter to Jesus in the first place. So maybe you look at yourself and you think, I don't really have much to offer. I see all these needs around me and I'm not smart enough, or I'm not young enough, or I'm not spiritual enough to make a difference. And I would encourage you to get your eyes off Peter and to look more at the example of Andrew and understand that everybody, as Susan said, has something they can offer. And that includes you. That includes you. Now, maybe what you have to offer seems piddling and insignificant in your eyes. More than that, maybe what you have to offer seems piddling and insignificant in the eyes of others who will disdain you. We are very quick to both doubt ourselves when we have to respond to a given situation, but we are also quick to judge others who do. And sometimes we think the response is just way too little. Like, what do you think you're doing? You've got nothing here. And other times we judge people for being too extravagant. Remember when the woman anoints the feet of Jesus with oil? What do the disciples say? At least some of them. You could have sold that for a lot more money and done much more good. Can you see how sometimes we do the same thing? When people offer to God things that are meaningful to them, but go against our personality or our preferences or our expectations, we are often quick to denigrate either the extravagance of others or the meager offerings that they bring to the table. I think this story teaches us that we should never do that. We need to know that anything you bring, and this is point number 3, anything you bring to any given situation will be honored by God and will be blessed by God. So next time you find yourself in a set of circumstances where you think, oh, there's nothing I can do, there's nothing I can offer, you need to walk that back. Think about this story and understand that anything in the hands of a mighty God is everything. Because he can use it. He can do things that you cannot do. He can do things you will not do. And he can make things happen. But it takes a servant heart. If we're going to respond to the needs around us, be they physical, be they emotional or spiritual, then we're going to have to be willing to step out and offer what we've got. It may be your experience. It could be your time or your money. It could be just your presence. Because sometimes you will be powerless to do much except meet people where they are and support them while God gets them to where they need to be. God cares about all your needs. We need to care about all the needs of other people. We need to understand that if we'll do that, then we have to be sure not to underestimate our own offerings or dismiss and disdain the offerings of other people. That will go a long way. Well, this is the thing that always stuns me. When you look at what the disciples have been through, what have they just been doing? They've been out teaching and preaching, but it also says that they had the capacity to do miracles. So they're out there using the power that Jesus gives them to do all these incredible supernatural things, and they come back here, and Jesus says, okay, what are we going to do? And their first response is, I don't know. They don't even seem to have faith in his ability to do anything. That's the first thing many of us do. When we're confronted with situations that intimidate us, one of the first responses is always to just cave, to buckle right away, and to think this is impossible. Then we try to hand it off to God. God often says, hold on. What are you going to do first? What are you going to do first? Prayer was never meant to be a labor-saving device. And yet, if you really stop and think about it, we spend so much time in our prayers asking God to do things he's already told us to do. Lord, bless the needy. He says, yeah, and I'm going to use you to do it. We need to take responsibility. That's one of the things this story really tries to communicate us. We need to take responsibility for what we can do, because if we are faithful in doing what we can do, God will be faithful in what only he can do. But he expects us to do what we can. That's the motto here. That's the message here. God goes above and beyond. He could have just given these people the bare minimum, just sent them on their way with a little token. Here's a snack to get you back to where you need to be. He doesn't do that at all. As a matter of fact, this story goes to great lengths to demonstrate to us that God is the God of abundance. God is wanting to bless us. God has the power to bless us, and God will bless us. And one of the ways we know that it's been God at work, not all the time, certainly. Make sure you understand this, not all the time, but many times we can know that God has been involved in a situation because he has this habit of going way above and beyond the call of duty. It's not ever the bare minimum. God is going to bless you with what you need, whether it's energy or time or whatever you ask of him. If it's in accordance with his will, and if his sovereignty allows for that to happen, then chances are good it's going to be in abundance. And that's one of the ways I've really learned to look for the fingerprints of God all over a situation. I really think you've got something really important there. For those of you who didn't hear, Linda is saying, sometimes it's hard to know if it really is God at work in a circumstance or a situation. But for her, the important thing is trust. Well, it seems to me that's the whole basis of the gospel message anyway. Whether God gives you what you want, or he says no, or he says not yet. We need to trust him, and we need to acknowledge not just his love, but his sovereignty, his wisdom, his care for us. And that gets to the heart of the whole thing. If we're only going to do that when we see what he's doing in our lives, or if we want what he's doing in our lives, then that limits our ability to have real faith. But if you can trust him, even when you don't know for sure it's him at work, or even if you don't know what the outcome's going to be, that would indicate to me that there's a bedrock assurance that you're going to be okay because God is involved in the situation. That's what he would have us do. But I think it's really important for us to understand that abundance is often a hallmark of what God is trying to do in our lives. And by the way, we should have that same response when people come to us. When people come to us and they need something, there's always a tendency to sort of say, all right, let me assess the situation first. And if we think that they're deserving, if we think they've done enough, if they think they're going to be grateful enough, then we might just answer that need. But often we just do that as much as we have to. I think sometimes that's how you can tell whether your response is born out of judgment or whether it's born out of the compassion that Jesus shows in this story. Because if all you're doing is just kind of throwing a bone to the dog and doing what you have to do and no more and no less, that's one thing. But when you go out of your way to bless people, regardless of their response, regardless of whether they're grateful, whether they appreciate or even acknowledge what you do, that would indicate to me that you're doing what you're doing because God has called you to. Because ultimately, we don't serve other people just because of them. We also serve them because of God and our relationship with him. That's part and parcel of the story too. So first of all, make sure that if you're a caregiver, you're spending some time looking after you because you can't do the rest of your responsibility if you do not do that. Second, just as Jesus has compassion upon these people, we need to have compassion upon the people around us and to understand that God is concerned about all their needs, material, emotional, spiritual, social. And we need to be concerned about those things too. Let's recognize that nothing we offer is too small. There is, as Susan said, something in your hand. So hand it over. Do what you can do. And just let God bless that in ways you cannot predict and cannot understand sometimes. And please do not disdain the offerings of other people, no matter how meager or how extravagant those offerings might be. And then let's look for signs that God is in the situation by seeing the abundance with which he treats us, his abundance of love, his abundance of material blessings, his abundance of you fill in the blank, because everything he gives in abundance. This week, God is inviting you to lunch. You can't pay for it. You can't earn his company and his favor, but he invites you into every situation that he has prepared for you this week. Remember that no matter what you see the need to respond to in the days ahead, God is already there. He has prepared the ground. He's simply waiting for you to offer something. And when you do, just remember that 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes didn't seem like much. Maybe what you have doesn't seem like much to you or other people. God is going to turn your situations this week into what we might call a power lunch.